Hello, and welcome to the conclusion of this week's podcast, Apocalypse Now, the Climate Crisis. There are so many prophecies in the religion of climate environmentalism. I will explain as we continue why I'm describing this branch of environmental conscientiousness as a religion. But first, let's consider the prophecies. We only have 12 harvests left. The world is overpopulated, which will doom us all. We are a virus that is going to destroy everything, and the end is nigh. In 1798, Thomas Malthus hypothesized that while population grows at a geometric rate, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, food only grows at an arithmetic rate, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the crisis of overpopulation was inevitable. This was expanded on in 1968 when a Stanford biologist, Paul Ehrlich's Population Bomb came out. Intellectuals and academics have recently begun to shift away from an obsession concerning overpopulation and the overconsumption of finite resources, but this shift has not yet reached the general public's consciousness. Which is why we still have institutions like the UN and Earth Overshoot Day issuing press releases preaching the doom of overpopulation. This has spawned the degrowth agenda, the antinatalist agenda, media stories about how the planet would be better off if there were no humans on it, and worst of all, climate activists who are destroying priceless works of art and the cultural treasures of history. Some mass shooters in the United States and Norway have been motivated by these causes to actually massacre people in order to, quote, help depopulate the earth. The mass shooting in El Paso, where 22 people were killed in 2019, was committed over this very cause, according to the shooter's own manifesto. In fact, while mass shootings have often been associated with extreme right-wing causes, today it is becoming increasingly more common for them to be associated with extreme left-wing causes. The shooter in El Paso killed people for consuming too many resources. The shooter in Nashville killed Christian school children over the trans issue. Several people have actually lit themselves on fire over the pro-Palestine cause, etc. On Monday, we covered Patrick Moore's views on carbon emissions. Now let's consider this conversation between Jordan Peterson and Dr. Judith Curry. Dr. Curry is a climatologist with a geophysical sciences PhD. She is the former chair of the School of Earth and Atmospheric Science at the Georgia Institute of Technology. She's worked with NASA and numerous academic institutions in the field of climate change and has over 190 publications. She advocates for a non-alarmist climate approach. She acknowledges Earth's rising temperatures with a grain of salt, i.e., the refusal to shut the doors of science to those with contrary views and findings. She left GIT citing the poisonous nature of the scientific discussion around man-made climate change as a key factor. She founded and acts as president of the Climate Forecast Applications Network. She is considered controversial on the climate front, where there is supposed to be a scientific consensus regarding a climate apocalypse. She first entered the limelight in 2005 after Hurricane Katrina, when she published findings that the percentage of Category 4 and 5 hurricanes had doubled in the recent decades due to global warming. This made her a hero with environmentalists. Now, for her failure to go along with the crowd and be radical enough for them, she is called a climate denier. She started out being demonized for findings in support of the idea of global warming, and now she is demonized for denying the degree of its present-day emergency. When ClimateGate broke in November of 2009, after IPCC authors hid information derailing a bill that was about to pass, she advocated for record transparency and making the data publicly available. She wanted the community to pay more attention to uncertainty and be more honest about their level of confidence, to treat skeptics with respect, and give credit to legitimate alternative opinions and findings, or seriously refute them when appropriate. But the climate community turned on her for not being more sensitive to the feelings of the scientists who were involved in the scandal. She was under the mistaken impression that this was about science, not the feelings of scientists. And the credibility of these institutions needed to be protected by holding themselves to high standards. There were big issues at stake, after all. As Jordan Peterson commented, well, any scientist that talks to you about whether you're hurting their feelings when you're launching a discussion of the factual basis of their claims has immediately stepped outside of the scientific domain. It's about the empirical statistical validity of your claims on a technical basis. If you diverge into irrational, emotional attacks or guilt trips, it's not science. The topic may be a scientific one, but what you're doing is no longer part of the scientific method, which relies on criticism to separate the wheat from the chaff and refine conclusions. She was not even disagreeing with their conclusions. She was only disagreeing with their behaviors, which basically said that this issue is too important to follow the rules and all is fair in love and war. Similar to the arguments we're hearing right now from the press, that they should not hold themselves to the standards of unbiased reporting and honestly covering the facts, even if those facts are inconvenient to the case they are trying to make. There are those who are presently arguing that the ends justify the means, and if they have to lie, manipulate, and omit things in their coverage when they report the current events to the public, to keep that public from arriving at conclusions that they don't want them to arrive at, then it's perfectly fine to throw their journalistic guidelines out of the window. I wholeheartedly disagree and think that such journalists need to be treated with extreme prejudice when it comes to excluding them from such trusted positions. Even when the science is clear, it should be able to stand up to an invalid argument. True science is capable of making its case. To shut down opposing viewpoints rather than disprove them is not good science, even when the data is clear, much less when there is doubt. She posed inconvenient questions which challenged a manufactured consensus that was built on very flimsy ground. A great scientist is someone willing to challenge the consensus, equipped with a better rational argument than the accepted one. That's what every great scientist in history has ever done, from Galileo and Copernicus challenging the consensus that the sun orbited around the earth, to those who challenged the idea accepted by all that the earth was flat, through Newton, Einstein, and Stephen Hawking. Quote, "Apart from what's going on in the atmosphere, to me, it's really the oceans and the sun that are the biggest source of uncertainty as far as understanding what's going on and being able to project into the future. The oceans vary with cycles such as El Niño and La Niña. Decadal and multi-decadal cycles change the patterns of clouds, the patterns of sea surface temperatures, the snowfall on Greenland, the Arctic sea ice, rainfall, etc. The models have too many gaps to factor that in. The sun is also unpredictable. There was a gap in the satellites measuring the sun when the Challenger blew up. One solar sensor was running out, and they were supposed to launch another one, but all launches were put on hold for several years while they sorted out the disaster. And the models can't effectively account for any of these variables. So much is not being factored in. They affect not only our predictions of what will happen, but our interpretations of what has been happening in the past century." End quote. She claims that the weakest part of the argument is that if their projections are correct, there isn't actually proof that it's dangerous. Quote, "They focus so heavily on extreme weather. Now, they try to associate every extreme weather event with man-made global warming, which is just not true. And there is a reason why they always use data from around the 70s. This is the worst storm since 1976, etc. It's because the weather in the first half of the 20th century was much more extreme than what we're experiencing now, and would therefore be a bad comparison." End quote. Tipping point hypotheses are pretty unlikely in complex systems. The only true tipping point is the West Antarctic ice sheet, in which human-caused global warming would play only a small part. It's unstable and moves. If it collapsed, which would be far more likely to happen from the volcanoes under it than because of global warming, the continent would be underwater, and the sea level rise would be substantial. At worst, it would be a slow process, and it's the only tipping point scenario that she sees as something that at least could happen. You can't stop earthquakes or volcanoes, but it would take centuries, and it's the only one that she sees as even plausible. Even the IPCC, with their projected 1 to 2 degree rise, is questioning the usefulness in terms of accurate projections of the climate models they cite. Her network's projections are leaning towards cooling rather than amplifying the warming. The idea that the proponents of this doomsday scenario are doubtful enough that things will even head in the direction of warming, which is why you're not supposed to refer to global warming anymore, but rather to climate change, shows how entirely up in the air this entire issue is. We might be dealing with warming. We might be dealing with cooling. We might be dealing with anything or nothing. The only thing that's consistent is that whatever it is, it's negative, it's imminent, and it is so catastrophic that we must take extreme immediate actions. People seem to like this simplicity and the idea that if we get rid of CO2, we'd have nicer weather. You could eliminate hurricanes and forest fires and polar vortexes and pretty much all natural disasters. The media latched onto this even further when child activist Greta Thunberg became the face of the movement. And what was a fringe topic suddenly became very mainstream, and then a battleground in the culture wars. Even the language is very deliberate. To be labeled a climate crisis denier echoes the idea of being a Holocaust denier, which is, of course, both morally repugnant and ludicrously ignorant. One of the consequences of extra carbon dioxide output is that the planet has greened 15% just since 2000. Most of that greening has occurred in semi-arid and denuded areas. That's an area bigger than the United States. Since we don't fully understand it, we would be reckless to increase the use of fossil fuels and CO2 emissions, but it's equally insane to cut our CO2 emissions on the same premise. We're hurting ourselves, we're not really reducing emissions that much, and we're making ourselves more vulnerable to extreme weather events. Jordan Peterson added, distinguishing between infrastructure inadequacy and weather catastrophe is very, very difficult. Even when Katrina hit New Orleans, you could say that it was a natural disaster, but you could also say that it was an abject failure of planning, as the Army Corps of Engineered dikes were only designed to withstand a 1 in 100-year storm, whereas when the Dutch built dikes, they designed them to withstand a 1 in 10,000-year storm. So whether that was a natural disaster or a consequence of human foolishness is not precisely clear, obviously. And the same thing applies on the energy front. If we impoverish the already poor by making the energy expensive, not only do we expose them to much more risk of life and limb, let's say, and property, but we also decrease the possibility that those self-same people are going to be able to take an environmentally oriented view. Because the data indicates that if you can get up to producing or benefiting from economic growth to the tune of about $5,000 a year in average GDP, then they start to take a medium to long-term view of the future and start to attend much more carefully to what you might describe as environmental concerns. So panicking about climate in the way we're doing, if the consequences is to raise energy prices and impoverish people, looks like it's going to kill more people. And I still want to ask your opinion about the greening. Not only is that not what was predicted, it is the very opposite of what was predicted. And it's the opposite in a very, very massive manner. I mean, 15% increase in greening, it's almost beyond comprehension. As I said, that's an area bigger than the continental United States. And then to say that's produced quite an increment in the productivity of human crops and enable us to grow more food in less area, those are facts that need to be taken with dead seriousness. They're very positive, perhaps. You could argue that maybe that rate of vegetation change brings with it threats that we haven't yet envisioned. That could be the case. But nonetheless, it certainly isn't the spreading of the deserts that we were led to be apprehensive of. No cost-benefit analysis. We're very good at adapting to a huge range of weather situations and climate scenarios. Some of us live in damn near Arctic conditions, and other people live in the desert, so it's not outside the realm of human adaptation to adapt to 1 or 2 degrees climate transformation. And animals should be able to do the same, assuming that we're responsibly intelligent on the environmental conservation front. End quote. The fact that places like the UN have prioritized the elimination of fossil fuels and the climate higher than eliminating poverty and hunger or providing electricity to impoverished parts of the world, that real problems in the world today have been pushed to the back burner for a problem that not everyone agrees is even a problem, much less one that we can solve, is insane. The UN is not in charge of science. They have their own set of responsibilities. It demonstrates the dearth of rationale surrounding this topic. Quote, "We're squandering opportunities for human development for senseless objectives that aren't expected to improve anyone's life over the course of the 21st century and could very well make us all worse off," Dr. Judith Curry concludes. Quote, "The models aren't very reliable, and it's absolutely 100% certain if we raise energy prices, which we have been doing quite effectively, and food prices, we're going to make life much more difficult for impoverished people throughout the developing world right now, in a way that's going to kill plenty of people, and it's certainly going to deprive others of educational opportunity and optimal nutritional input and all of that. 100% certain that's going to occur. But the moral aspect is that we shouldn't be doing things that endanger those people that are oppressed and poor, but the policies we're pursuing do precisely that. So again, I'm still left with the complete incapacity to understand how this can possibly be the case. I don't get it, because there's lots of other things that we could be doing." End quote. African leaders have begun referring to, quote, "green colonialism" and energy apartheid, the effects of which they're facing because of these global warming policies. Quote, "It leaves me open-mouthed in amazement that we in the developing world, with our functional economies and a high level of luxury and security, can say to the developing world, well, we've got it pretty good here, and we're probably willing to cut back a little bit, but you guys down there in the developing countries, you should be pretty damn careful about your carbon output because we've only got one planet." It isn't really obvious that any of you should have the same kind of benefits that we have. The planet can't sustain that level of luxury and security, and so we're just not going to let you have any money. We're not going to help you develop your economies so you can benefit from the same industrial revolution that has enabled us to educate our children and have plenty to eat and be warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And then what's even more preposterous is that it's the very people who are constantly clamoring about the oppressive nature of Western culture who are hoisting this very story on these developing countries. Dr. Curry agrees with Jordan. The irony is that even if the African nations were given the carbon credits or whatever and allowed to develop to where they want to be and where everybody expects them to be, at most they would be emitting like 5 or 6% of global emissions. And this is for like 1 billion people in the population. So we're not talking about a lot of extra emissions to allow them to develop. It just makes absolutely no sense. It's evil. It's absolutely evil. Jordan replied, Lumbergh has done the most credible job, and he's also been given a damn rough ride in the media. He's doing pretty well now promoting his message, which is, what he lays out is such a lovely scenario because he shows how much good we could do in the world, especially with regard to the amelioration of absolute poverty and the provision of education, at such a tiny fraction of the amounts of money devoted to this insane prevention of non-existent climate apocalypse. I've been doing everything I can, for whatever it's worth, to draw attention to his work. He didn't label the use of fossil fuels as the end-all be-all of environmental issues, and they were so set on this one particular policy that they saw his views as dangerous. For reasons which became harder to justify as time went on and more information became available, but they're still stuck on this one trivial issue. It defies logic unless your primary goal is easy moral virtue. So imagine the problem with Lumbergh's work, fundamentally, is the problem with marketing it. He says, well, we don't just have one problem, climate apocalypse. We have like 100 problems. And then we have the problem of how to rank order these problems. And then we have the problem of generating actual solutions and assessing them. And that actually requires a lot of cognitive effort. And so if you're a climate apocalypse activist, you can reduce the entire panoply of human problems to one problem. And then you can put yourself forward as a moral person by just saying, well, I'm definitely concerned about the fate of the planet, and that's all anybody reasonable should be concerned about. And because I'm concerned in that manner, I'm a fully credible and reputationally remarkable person. Dr. Curry adds that worse, everything bad that happens, someone finds a path to blame it on climate change. And the media amplifies it, and this gives politicians an easy out. So rather than the real problems, poor land use, poor regulations, poor inadequate infrastructure, whatever might be the cause of their actual problems, they simply blame it on global warming. So it gives them an easy out. Jordan chimed in, yeah, I read an article yesterday that said that climate change was increasing the risk that women were being abused in their homes. That's just a classic example. You could make the case that whatever produces economic stress is going to raise the rates of abuse, but to link it directly to climate change is a really egregious example of exactly the kind of thing you're describing. I agree with him. I remember a story from a few months ago that complained that climate change was responsible for increasing the rainfall during tsunami season in Thailand, which is not even true. The rain is well within normal range for tsunami season. But this supposed increase in rain was apparently disproportionately impacting trans hookers in Thailand, who were unable to pick up johns on the street because of the rain. Now, I don't know about you, but even if that story is true, I'm not sure it's worth letting a child die in Africa to reduce carbon to fix that problem. But the weird part is, consider, why is this disproportionately affecting prostitutes as opposed to anyone with an outdoor job, such as construction workers? And why is it impacting trans hookers more than regular hookers? And am I really supposed to believe that if some perv flies all the way to Thailand to pick up a trans streetwalker on the corner, that he's going to decide to forget it all because it's raining today? Even setting aside the whole issue of the story being based on inaccurate assertions about the rainfall, or compounding the issue with should this be prioritized even if it's true, which is a question I've begun to ask myself about every trending news story, like the one I reported last week about, does milk have a history of racism? Even if it does it matter enough to devote our resources to finding out? I don't think it does. I think making sure that a mom with cancer gets health care, and a child is given a route out of poverty through education, and religious extremists in the Middle East are not allowed to go nuclear, and no more 12-year-old little girls get sexually assaulted and left in the ditch to die in the gutters of Houston, and we put an end to human trafficking, are all more important than the question of racist milk. And they leave our plates pretty full. There is no shortage of problems, real problems, that can be solved and need to be solved. All we have to do is prioritize those, and I guarantee you'll never even get around to the place where you have the luxury of worrying about, is milk racist? Or are trans hookers being put out of work by climate change? As a society, we need to start setting the standard that we will only give our attention, even a moment of our attention, to those who are serious. The days of shallow sensationalism and cheap virtue needs to be brought to a swift and conclusive end. And let's replace it with some optimism for a change. Superabundance, the story of population growth, innovation, and human flourishing on an infinitely bountiful planet, was written by Marion Tuppy. While it is true that everything is made up of atoms, and there are only so many atoms out there, therefore if they are being consumed, you will eventually run out, that ignores the fact that humans are the only species that innovates. We have historically created many ingenious solutions to many problems over the centuries. Thomas Sowell famously said, "The caveman had the same natural resources at their disposal as we have today, and the difference between their standard of living and ours is a difference between the knowledge they could bring to bear on those resources and the knowledge used today." Think of it this way. A Ferrari driven off the lot is worth a lot of money. And it's also highly useful as a form of transportation. A totaled Ferrari wrapped around a fence post has the exact same number of atoms, but is less valuable in both worth and usefulness. So even with a finite number of atoms, we can still create an infinite amount of value through intelligent innovation. The iPhone, for example, is replacing television sets, cameras, maps, calculators, compasses, notebooks, and a variety of other devices that all used to be separate, which demonstrates how innovation leads to less consumption through greater value. Issues like the housing crisis are the result of bad policy decisions, not a lack of space. Skyscrapers can house hundreds of families. And Marion asserts that every new human being, on average, produces more resources than they consume. So why are people so concerned about human population growth? So much so that new anxieties are actually being created over environmental causes. G.K. Chesterton said, "When men stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing. They believe in anything." This has definitely proven true in our times of wild conspiracy theories like flat earthers and radicals of all kinds and sizes. The climate crisis adherents have definitely become more religious in nature than scientific. I'm not talking about environmentalists who simply want clean water and air and to protect endangered species. That's good, and I'm one of them. I'm talking about those activists who believe that humanity is a scourge on the earth, a virus that will destroy it, and are using junk science to push an agenda that will cost actual human lives, not in some distant future, maybe, but as soon as they're enacted. We are the only species in the world, possibly the universe, that is capable of foreseeing our own deaths. An antelope knows to run away from a lion in order to go on living, but it doesn't have a sense of its own finite nature and a knowledge of its destined end that it lives with in between those sprints to preserve its life. But we do. And this leads to a deep need to find meaning in something beyond ourselves. For most of history, this space within us, created by this need, was filled with religion. These days, many people do not subscribe to any substantial faith or traditional religion, but the need remains, and new religions have arisen. Extreme environmentalism is definitely one of these new religions. Consider how well it maps onto religions such as Christianity. Marion says, quote, "On the one hand, you've got your Garden of Eden. That's the world before industrialization. You have your devils, fossil fuel CEOs, people like that. You have your saints, Greta Thunberg. You have your priesthood, which is the IPCC scientists. And of course, you even have indulgences, like back in the days before the Reformation, where you are allowed as one of the chosen few to fly around the world on a private jet. But so long as you give a few $1,000s to a green cause, all those sins are completely washed away. That is why someone like Leo DiCaprio or John Kerry or Emma Thompson can go on the telly having just flown in first class and be a good environmentalist. Their sins have been washed away by saying the right incantations and sending the right amount of money to those green causes. So that's a very long way of saying that there are religious overtones to environmentalism. And one of the fundamental features of any religion is apocalypse, is the end of days, the world that ends and is going to reconstitute itself in some way. And Christianity has it, Islam has it, Judaism has it, Hinduism and Buddhism have it. Some religions, like Christianity, are working up to the end of days where the world will end. Others have a circular religious belief where the world will be destroyed, but then is going to be renewed, and it's an eternal cycle like that. But all of them have this notion of an apocalypse. And so I think that plays a very large role in why people keep on embracing these apocalyptic views. One of the statistics I'm very proud of in the book that we have found is that the number of apocalyptic movies has been growing every decade since the 1950s, even though the world has improved along very many different dimensions. We live longer. We live healthier lives. We are much richer. Poverty is collapsing around the world. But with every decade, the number of apocalyptic movies is actually increasing, with one exception, and it was the 1990s because of the peaceful resolution of the Cold War. End quote. Look, global apocalypse could definitely happen. Madmen in charge of nuclear weapons, an asteroid strike, a deadly pathogen, any of these could start an unstoppable chain reaction. But the richer and more advanced the society is, the more likely it is to be able to come up with solutions to problems. Hypothetically, a society a few decades from now with unlimited energy created by fusion power could conceivably power a massive weapon with the ability to blow up an asteroid. That's not possible right now because our knowledge is not advanced enough yet. But it's certainly conceivable that it might very soon be possible at the rate our knowledge is improving and with advancements like AI. And not all the predictions are gloomy ones. Some models predict that we will be 6 times richer on average across the globe by the year 2100, 76 years from now. If that happens, our society would be much better able to recover from measures like the ones taken during COVID to shut down the whole economy for 2 years, to wait out a truly deadly pathogen in a pandemic where that might actually be necessary. The world may indeed end, but it's not going to end because we run out of natural resources, according to Marion. If there is a resource that goes up in price because it becomes less abundant and more scarce, then humanity will do what it has always done, which is to evolve. We will use less of it. Soda cans used to contain 3 ounces of aluminum. Now they contain a half an ounce. We replace things that become expensive with other ideas. We no longer kill whales for oil and candles. We produce electricity. When prices on resources go up, we search for new deposits or we turn to other resources. We see cycles where things become more expensive in the short run, but then as they're replaced, things actually become cheaper in the long run. In fact, we are even beginning to hear about the depopulation bomb. Western democracies, including the United States, which has a bigger social safety net even than Canada, are failing to reproduce at even replacement rates. Quote, "We have promised so much to future generations that we have no idea how we're going to pay for it. Our social security system is a Ponzi scheme based on the notion that there are always more people at the bottom paying the retirees at the top. If that pyramid starts going like this, inverting, then of course our taxes will have to go massively up in order to pay for the promises that we have promised to future generation in terms of Social Security. Another problem with depopulation is going to be national debt. If you have fewer people being taxed, then it's going to be so much harder and so much longer paying the debt down." But the most important reason why depopulation could be a problem, not could be, but will be a problem, is that human beings are the only entities in the world capable of having new ideas. And new ideas lead to inventions, and those inventions then get market tested. And out of that, you get innovations that improve productivity and standards of living. So without human beings, no new ideas, no new cancer drugs, no new ways of transport, no new breakthroughs in energy, including clean energy. We simply need people in order to innovate. No one else is going to do it for us unless we get AI, and I have no idea when or if that's going to happen. End quote. China would have had 400 million more people today if not for its one-child law between 1980 and 2016. And more importantly, its population pyramid would look much healthier than it does today if those children had been born. As things stand now, America and Britain will probably begin turning to Bangladesh and India to replace China in the world economy, which is ultimately a good thing, as they are at least free democracies. But China is quickly running out of road. The GPD per capita in the United States is around $70,000. In China, it's around $10,000. So they are not going to be able to catch up to Western democracies, especially as their depopulation bomb sets in and they become more dictatorial both politically and economically to maintain control of their systems as they implode. Without economic freedom, you cannot have economic growth. China has been the most populated country in the world for at least 2,000 years, but it has been very poor up until recently because you need people, but you need free people. People must be free to speak, to exchange ideas and criticize them in order to innovate. People also have to have economic freedom to buy and sell, invest and profit for economies to grow. And China has been moving away from economic freedom for about a decade now. So they are reaching their peak in more ways than one. On the negative side, China knows all of this. And if they know that they will never be stronger than they are at this moment, they may become aggressive and strike while the iron is hot, especially when it comes to issues like Taiwan, who we depend on for our microchips. Korea is an even bigger mess population-wise. Every 100 people in Korea will only have 4 great-grandchildren between all of them. That spells an end to their culture soon if something is not done. And the U.S., Britain, and the West in general are not doing well in this regard either. But we do have one advantage. Freedom is necessary for prosperity. Those conditions are linked, not accidental. China has mimicked Western development and has prospered as a result. But without truly embracing the principles on more than just a surface level, their success is going to be short-lived. Without freedom to explore ideas, you don't produce quality research, data that can be criticized by other scientists and even rejected. If you have the freedom to reject an idea or product, you have no real ability to force things on the lower class or on anyone. Without quality research, you don't produce your own innovations as a society. There is a huge difference between mimicry and the amount of success you can achieve through that, which collapses when there is no one to mimic, and truly being a world leader in innovations and advancements. Dictatorships that do not allow freedom will always be their own undoing. Large empires like China, the Soviet Union, the Ottoman Empire, etc., had no reason to fear an outside invasion, but every reason to fear an internal revolution. Their solution was to clamp down and squash dissent and individualism. This also destroyed innovation and progress, and China, just like the Soviet Union and the Ottoman Empire, will collapse under its own weight as a result. Western Europe has never really successfully been conquered since the time of the Roman Empire, although Napoleon came close. Europe remained a collection of disjointed countries that competed. And it is not an accident that innovations like the Industrial Revolution happened there and not elsewhere in the world. This idea that the West just got lucky and needs to feel guilty about that, no, we didn't. Some ideas are actually better than others. Some ways of government are actually better than others and lead to better outcomes. It was not luck. It was design. Now, the West did a lot of awful things too, and I'm not trying to defend those things. You can do both bad things and good things. But just because we did a lot of bad does not mean that we got to where we are by sheer luck. The good ideas that were among those bad ones led to this. Our present-day struggles are not a cause for pessimism, but they are a cause for us to make some serious changes. Quote, "The present-day energy problems in Britain are not a result of any physical limits on fossil fuels or energy. They are the outcome of stupid decisions made by their politicians for the last 20 years. On the continent, it's the same thing. It's not an outcome of climate change, it's an outcome of climate policies. We moved too quickly without having a plan to basically eliminate, as much as possible, fossil fuels. Whatever your reviews on fossil fuels, I'm not taking a position on this. I do believe that emitting ever more CO2 into the atmosphere is a problem, but clearly the timeline and the plan that our politicians have come up with was completely unrealistic. We are not paying a price for there being too little oil or gas in the world or uranium. We are paying a penalty for politicians forcing us into energy consumption patterns which were not congruent with reality. And that's what the book is about. The book tells you that there is plenty to be used for hundreds of thousands, millions of years. We're never going to run out of these energy resources or natural resources. But yes, as a society, we could certainly decide not to use them and simply to shut off the lights and just close the door on Western civilization. We could do that. But that's going to be a choice. That's not going to be forced on us by physical limits of the planet. End quote. Growing up in the 90s, we heard that coal was going to run out by around 2050. And oil was supposed to run out by like 2020. But today we have greater known reserves of oil and natural gas than we even knew of 100 years ago, despite the amounts of oil we have consumed during that 100 years. Quote, and these are just the known resources. That doesn't mean that there are not other reserves in the world that we have not yet discovered. And we may not even be consuming oil or natural gas 100 years from now. Consider the lithium crisis. Electric vehicles use lithium-ion batteries. And we have seen so many stories about the scarcity of lithium. How are we going to find more? What if the Chinese find new deposits first, etc.? But who is to say that electric vehicles will continue to run off lithium-ion even 20 years from now? There are currently scientists who are working on sodium-ion batteries. And there are plenty of salt deposits around the world. Continuing, quote, people who are insanely fearful of running out of anything forget that technology always changes. Just because we are using something today does not mean that we will need it in the future, end quote. We have to be able to re-examine some of our irrational fears to discard them as irrational. Our mostly instinctive resistance to nuclear power, born out of the 1970s fear of nuclear weapons and nuclear war, that overflowed into concerns about nuclear energy, compounded by incidents like the 7 Mile Island nuclear accident, where nobody died, but everyone overreacted, and we put a stop to building nuclear power stations ever since. We must be willing to go back and re-examine the validity of such decisions. We must reevaluate the true risk. Quote, when you look at the number of people who have died from different energy sources, nuclear energy is not only one of the cleanest, but it is also one of the safest based on statistics. Nuclear energy produces no CO2. Industrial accidents while building these sites have killed very few people, far less, in fact, than even those who have died while building wind farms, for example, or hydroelectric dams. And it is much better at producing less indoor pollution or burning biofuels, both of which kill millions of people. It's a choice we have made, and we can always make a new choice. We could soon see a nuclear renaissance. But the price involved in building these stations still makes natural gas the cheapest option in the present, even taking CO2 into account. But if the religious devotion to not burning fossil fuels is here to stay and insurmountable, then nuclear is the way to go, and hopefully in future, fusion, end quote. So many people have drunk the Greta Thunberg Kool-Aid, but with energy growing increasingly more unaffordable, we are going to have to wake up and become realistic, and more importantly, informed on the actual facts rather than a panicked knee-jerk reaction, and very soon. We need to stop pretending, and it is pretending, that people in Africa and India, in third world and developing nations struggling to just live, are going to let their children die to buy into elitist values and build unworkable wind farms. It's not going to happen, so we need to start coming up with some real solutions. They would have to be in a totally different place developmentally in their economies for that to even be a possibility. We live in reality, and we have to come up with solutions within the confines of that reality. We need to quit pretending that options that are not workable are actual possibilities and devote our attentions to the real solutions. And we need to quit spreading panic by thoughtlessly repeating everything we hear on the internet or from scared autistic children as though it's factual. And in the West, democracy is going to win. Unlike the way the media uses that word, I don't just mean my way when I say democracy. When they say democracy is going to end if their candidate is not elected, what they mean is them getting their way is going to end if their candidate is not elected. Democracy is the rule of the people. If the people vote for something, by definition, that cannot be the end of democracy. And for the record, every time climate extremists destroy a Van Gogh painting or permanently mark up and mar cultural treasures like Stonehenge, or glue themselves to the freeways where they keep cars emitting CO2 for longer than they otherwise would if they had been allowed to get to their destinations and be turned off, actually harming the planet rather than just merely completely failing to improve it, they are triggering people's stubborn streak. I know this because every time I see them destroy a cultural treasure like Stonehenge or an irreplaceable work of art, all I personally want to do is go out and buy the biggest gas-guzzling car on the market and leave it running 24 hours a day just to spite them. Even if they're right and doing so would harm me too. And a lot of other people are reacting that same way. So they really need to start rethinking their methods because it's backfiring in a major way. Ruining Stonehenge does not save the planet in any way. And it just makes people want to go out and buy that gas-guzzling car. So congratulations on that. These activists do not understand that not everyone shares their same paralyzing level of fear over their particular doomsday issue. They believe falsely but sincerely that if they get our attention through these destructive temper tantrums, that we will become aware of our own impending doom, and once aware, we will panic and join them. That entire rationale is false. We are already aware of the issue. We are just not as deeply terrified of it as you are. I know you may not understand that, but that is the situation. You need to actually convince people. All you are doing is ticking us off and making us far less likely to listen to you. And you do yourselves no favors by linking your causes to other political ones, Greta, like the Free Palestine pro-Hamas groupie movement. It is not going to be the net zero people who get elected to power in democracies. In fact, people are turning on these policies. As long as living standards continue to collapse under these policies, it will grow rarer and rarer for these politicians to be elected to positions of power at all. You will never get people to prioritize those who have not even been born yet, who might be impacted 3 or 4 generations down the road, over their own living struggles happening today. Never. It goes against human nature, and you will not succeed in changing human nature. When ordinary people can't afford to adequately heat or cool their own homes, they are not going to listen to John Kerry as he flies his private plane around the world and talks about a crisis, while his actions demonstrate that there is no true crisis. Otherwise, he would be teleconferencing. People like him undermine their own scare tactics constantly and are therefore not believable to most people and never will be while that continues. The same people who want tighter gun laws are always protected by well-armed private security. And it doesn't go unnoticed that they want to abandon the working class to the rising crime rates resulting from their policies while they remain protected and attempt to claim some virtue in the process. They increase the taxes on air travel while they fly around in private jets or in first class, which is much more carbon intensive. They want to force the working class to buy much more expensive tiny cars that are better for the environment, while they drive around in SUVs the size of houses as part of motorcades everywhere they go. We are told that we are all going to drown from the rising oceans by the people who are buying beachfront properties in exclusive neighborhoods like Martha's Vineyard. And most people feel insulted at being treated as though they are stupid, blind, and panicked simpletons. The hoi polloi. The civil unrest is growing on so many fronts, and with each abuse of power forced down on the public, they become less willing to trust you the next time. Like China, they're running out of road fast. All the civil liberties that were violated during COVID were tolerated because people were scared. They were willing to give up their freedoms and rights in exchange for a feeling of safety. But the abuses they saw, the lies that were revealed, and the ineffectiveness of what was delivered in exchange has made people far less likely to tolerate such a situation again. Although new situations will always mean new fears, which will always make people easier to control, temporarily. But just like with COVID, they eventually said, enough. And that's a word the elites better get used to hearing, because they're going to start hearing it a lot. Every single environmental doomsday prediction that has ever been made has proven to be false. The dates have come and gone, and the world continues on. There is only so much, or should I say, so little credibility left to this cause. And it is mostly young people who are the most easily panicked by their own feelings that are still adherents to this movement in its present form. As I said, environmentalists who want clean air and water and protecting endangered species, that's a whole different group. I'm not talking about them. I'm one of them. Free markets determine which innovations are valuable and which are not. Quote, in this book, we have looked at 18 different data sets, with some of our data sets going back to 1850, and we looked at hundreds of commodities, goods, finishing goods, services, food, fuel, etc. And what we found is that for every 1% increase in the population, we had a 1% decrease in the price of all these goods, services, and commodities. And that tells us that human beings, on average, are more producers than they are consumers. That tells us that we are really able to produce more wealth than we consume. Otherwise, you would see the opposite. For every 1% increase in population, you would see an increase in the price with greater scarcity. For the blue-collared working-class Americans starting in 1850, compared to today, pork fell in price by 98%, meaning that the amount of time you had to work in 1950 to earn enough money for 1 pound of pork would today, working the same amount of time, buy you 63 pounds of pork. For the same amount of work that would have bought you a pound of rice, you now get 41 pounds of rice. The amount of work that used to buy you a pound of wheat now gets you 31 pounds of wheat. The same follows for corn, rye, barley, coffee, minerals like nickel, copper, and phosphate. Everywhere they've found that prices have dropped, despite there being 1 billion people in the world in the 1800s and 8 billion people consuming these resources today. If you look at the world prices after 1980, when globalization began, just 40 years ago, coffee is 85% cheaper. You can get 7 for the price of 1. Pork is 84% cheaper. You get 7 for the price of 1. Salmon is 80% cheaper. You get 5 for the price of 1. In the last 40 years, living standards have improved by around 250% on a global average. Compare that to tens of thousands of years through human history where living standards didn't improve at all for centuries. If the average person lived to be about 30 in ancient Egypt, the average person centuries later in ancient Rome was still only living till around 30. Then they were still living to about 30 in Norman England. The same percentage of babies died in Britain in the year 1000 as they did in ancient Egypt. There was no real improvement in living standards, infant mortality rates, lifespan, food scarcity, etc. over thousands of years. So if we have increased our living standards by 250% in just 4 decades, there is obviously reason to be optimistic. Yes, we often take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but don't forget to zoom out and focus on the big picture. We went from the first flight on Kitty Hawk to walking on the moon in 66 years. 1 lifetime. From no man having ever flown to airlines and flying to the stars. We learn and we course correct. And despite all of technology's drawbacks, few people would deny that having open heart surgery today is a substantially better prospect than it was in the 1980s. Few people would deny that our homes and cars are not better, even environmentally, than they were in the 1980s. Decoding the human genome cost $1 billion. Now each individual can get their own genome decoded for $100, which gives you the ability to identify your health risks and proactively personalize your intakes to optimize your health for a lifetime. What if fusion energy develops over the next few years, making energy virtually free? Come on, people, there's every reason in the world to have some optimism when it comes to the way we're thinking about the future. So don't consume only the pessimistic diet. only to wake up one day and realize that you've lived at the height of mankind's pinnacle and needlessly spent every day of a fantastic life drowning in fear and misery. Quote, any technology developed by the human brain can be used for good and evil. A baseball bat can be used to hit a baseball and can be used to bash you to death. Not to mention guns and anything else, knives. What you do with your technology also matters. I think that any new technology, from gramophones to bicycles, was first met with a wall of negativism. The writing of novels was supposed to lead to mental collapse throughout the Western world. Television, radio, all these things were considered to be potentially world-ending events, but they didn't happen. I think that when it comes to social media, I don't like them. I don't partake. I left Facebook in 2012 when I realized that it was making me unhappy. That what I was putting up on Facebook was a curated picture of my life, and what I was consuming was a curated picture of my life. So basically, I was posting lies and consuming lies. And once I realized that, I left Facebook. And that was a choice. A choice that can be made independently by any number of you, by all 8 million people. So I think that what we are going through right now is a period of adjustment to a new technology. But that period of adjustment will resolve itself. It took us 50 years to figure out that drinking and driving was not a good idea. And right now it's sort of been internalized into us that cars are much better operated when sober. But it took time to square the human brain with this new technology. And I think that will probably happen with social media as well, or at least I hope that it will happen with social media. That people are simply going to leave, realize that much of it is simply unreal, making them unhappy, and they could be spending that time doing better things than being on social media. So these are early days. It's a new technology, but I think we will probably figure it out in the way we have figured out novels and bicycles and radio and televisions. End quote. Freedom of speech and innovation has often come from eccentric people, imperfect people, neurodivergent individuals who may have weird forms of behaviors, but where would we be without them? Genius usually comes from people like this. So we need to turn our backs on cancel culture. That doesn't mean we embrace all ideas from everyone and believe every crazy conspiracy theory. It means that we don't permanently exile people from society over a personal disagreement or a single moral failing on their part. Climate activism is based less and less on the science of what is actually good for the planet and more on a zealous religious fervor that revolves more around regarding humans as a plague and therefore condemning everything that is good for them, regardless of its effect on the planet. But for those caught up in the fearful spell of the high priest of what has become a new religion, for those who are scared of what they believe is science, I would urge them first to evaluate if the people they are listening to prove that there is a problem with facts that resound in your head with the aim of directing you towards a real solution, or are they always appealing to your fears by evoking your emotions while assuring you that the details are too complicated and you'd never understand the science, as they encourage you to trust them as the so-called experts tell you that there is a problem with no real solution except something that is almost equally as scary, so either way, be afraid, be very, very afraid. And second, even if you believe there is a problem, which there may be, I urge you to approach it from the standpoint that Konstantin Kisin presented at the debate at Oxford a year ago that went viral. Quote, I am so tired of talking about woke culture. That's why it's gone too far, more than anything else. And I thank the other speakers for making the points for me because it means that I don't have to reiterate the point that no, free speech is not some right-wing reframing of whatever. It's the foundation of Western civilization. Upon this, civilization is built, and the Enlightenment values that led to it. I don't have to make the point that has been made by far better people in the past, that the only way to deal with racism is to treat people on the content of their character, and nothing else. And the fact that woke culture seeks to overturn that is a new form of racism that we must all oppose. It means also that I will not use this opportunity to say I told you so. As someone who spent the last 5 years warning people in the West that if we continue to erode our culture, if we continue to undermine our confidence in Western values, then our enemies like Vladimir Putin, will seek to capitalize on it. I will not make any of those points tonight. At all. I'm not going to talk to those of you who already agree with me, which I imagine is most of you. I'm not going to talk to you because I imagine after everything you've heard tonight, you're going to vote for the proposition. I'm going to confess that I will take your vote for granted. Tonight, I am the Labor Party and you are the Red Wall. Now, I want to talk to those of you who are woke and who are open to rational argument. That's a small minority, I accept, because one of the tenets of wokeism is, of course, that your feelings matter more than the truth. But I believe in you. I believe that there are those of you who are here, who are woke, who are open to rational arguments. And so, let me make one. We are told that your generation cares more than any other about one issue in particular, and that issue is climate change. We're told that many of you suffer from climate anxiety. You wish to save the planet, and I, for tonight, and tonight only, I will join you. I will join you in worshiping at the feet of St. Greta of climate change. Let us all accept right here, right now, that we are living through a climate emergency and our stocks of polar bears are running extremely low. I join you in this view. I truly do. Now, what are we to do about this huge problem facing humanity? What can we in Britain do? We can only do one thing. You know why? This country is responsible for 2% of global carbon emissions, which means that if Britain were to sink into the sea right now, it would make absolutely no difference to the issue of climate change. You know why? Because the future of the climate is going to be decided in Asia and in Latin America by poor people who don't give a shit about saving the planet. You know why? Because they're poor. I come from Russia, which is not a poor country, it's a middle-income country. 20% of households in Russia do not have indoor toilets. What they have is an outdoor toilet. And I don't mean one of those nice portaloos that we get here. I don't even mean a Glastonbury portaloo. I mean a wooden shack with a hole in the ground that holds the fermented memory of the last 10,000 visits. How many of you are going to go home tonight and say, let's rip out our bathroom and erect a Siberian shithouse in our backyard? And if you're not, why should they? 120 million people in China do not have enough food. I don't mean that they don't get dessert. I mean that they suffer from malnutrition. That means that their immune system is breaking down because they don't have enough food. You're not going to get them to stay poor. Imagine you're Xi Jinping, the leader of China. When you were 10 years old, there was a revolution, a cultural revolution in your country, and people came and they put your father in prison. Your mother had to denounce him. Your sister killed herself. And you, no longer enjoying the protection of your formerly powerful father, were sent to a village where you lived in a cave house. And here you are, decades later. You have clawed your way up the bloody and greasy pole of Chinese politics to be the undisputed supreme leader of the very Communist Party that destroyed your family. And you know that the main thing you have to do to survive and to stay in power is to deliver the one thing that the people of China want: prosperity, economic growth. Where do you think climate change ranks on Xi Jinping's list of priorities? 1/3 of all children who live in extreme poverty in the world live in India. That means they are starving and dying of preventable disease. Now, about 15 months ago, my wife got pregnant. Not me, because we're old school. And for 9 months, we talked about what our boy would look like and what he might do when he grows up. We looked at baby scans and videos on YouTube about what the fetus looks like at 9 months and 12 months and 20 months, and eventually he was born. And he is this cute little bundle of joy. He's cuter than about 80% of puppies, right? Now, if you said to me that I had a choice, either my son had a serious risk of starving or dying of preventable disease in the next year, or I could press a button and he would live. He would go to school. He would bring his first girlfriend home. He'd go to university and graduate and become a woke idiot. And then he'd get a job and get married and have children and become a man. But all I have to do is press this button, and for every day of my son's life, a giant plume of CO2 is going to get released into the atmosphere. Now, you're all very young, and most of you are not parents yet. Let me tell you something. There is not a parent in the world that would not smash that button so hard their hand bled. You are not going to get these people to stay poor. You are not even going to get them to not want to be richer. And so I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, there is only one thing we can do in this country to stop climate change, and that is to make scientific and technological breakthroughs that will create the clean energy that is not only clean but also cheap. And the only thing that wokeness has to offer in exchange is to brainwash bright young minds like you to believe that you are victims, to believe that you have no agency, to believe that what you must do to improve the world is to complain, is to protest, is to throw soup on paintings. And we on this side of the house are not on this side of the house because we do not wish to improve the world. We sit on this side of the house because we know that the way to improve the world is to work, is to create, is to build. And the problem with woke culture is that it's trained too many young minds like yours to forget about that. Thank you very much. It's a great speech. And as I've said before, if you truly believe that not enough aid is getting into Palestine, which isn't true, but let's assume that it is, then go over there and volunteer to drive the trucks in. If you believe that slavery is an institution so evil that it must be atoned for by those who never committed that sin centuries later, then actually do something to help the people who are still suffering under it today. There are more slaves in the world today than there have ever been at any other time. What are you doing to help them? Because a hashtag isn't going to do it. And if that's the max effort you're willing to put into a cause you claim to be passionate about, then why should I or anyone else take you seriously? If you are so concerned about saving the planet that you have a panic attack over it, what are you actually doing besides posting and protesting? What are you doing in your life to actively improve the condition of the planet itself? If you truly believe that others should live without electricity and meat and cars and pretty much everything else in our modern life, have you given up all those things yourself and moved to the countryside where you work from sunup to sundown, physically farming the land by hand, living or dying off of whatever you produce? No, you're not. You know how I know? Because you're reading this article right now on your smart device, which was made in a factory that emits carbon and was then shipped on a truck, which emits more carbon, to a store where you drove to pick it up or had it delivered to you, either way emitting more carbon, and are still alive right now knowing that every breath you take in and exhale out emits carbon. If you're going to embrace a religious ideology because you don't know enough about the scientific data, so you have to trust someone, why not choose a positive outlook? Why not choose to look at human beings as an amazing, innovative species, the only species on the planet, maybe the universe, that even cares about preserving the planet and other species? You're living at the pinnacle of an age that is so gloriously advanced, and in the center of the hub of the wheel of the world, the West, where we live in such luxury that we have the privilege of even worrying about such things as the future and the climate and the survival of other species and the planet. Because our mind is not entirely consumed with more pressing matters, such as where the next meal is coming from and how to keep a loved one from dying. We should be excited by all the incredible advancements all around us and the unprecedented diversity of opportunities at our fingertips to pursue. I'm not telling you to ignore the facts for a sunny outlook just because ignorance is bliss, but when the facts don't seem clear-cut and require us to trust someone who understands it better, why choose to trust someone who is hypocritically doing one thing while encouraging you to drown in self-loathing and misery? encouraging you to atone for existing by destroying your life, the lives of everyone you care about and know, and the lives of strangers far away in poverty to save you from a problem that may eventually happen after you're dead, but which you should live every day in terror of for some reason. Why would you choose that instead of listening to those who make just as rational of an argument with just as many facts and statistics, who tell you that you are part of a species that is good and improving things, and we should be good stewards of the planet, which we can absolutely do while living life fully? Choose life. Embrace it unapologetically, and don't look back at the doomsayers. Make the healthy choice to cut out of your mental diet the consuming of emotional resources that only make you sink further into the sickness of mind and soul, into depression and darkness and hopelessness and despair, and perhaps worst of all, fear. I lived there for a lot of years, and I'm encouraging you with all my heart to turn your back on it and choose what is good for you. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.